Let's light this candlestick and put this bitch into orbit. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. Whichever time zone you're watching us from. I'm Thomas Fessler, my friends, and this is Disclosure Tonight. Happy Saturday, July 5th, 2025, as we head into the second half of the year. Wow, we've got a lot of great stuff to talk on here today. We've got a special guest in Ivan Hannel today to talk about one of his new clients and some coverage that we've heard from Eric Burleson and, of course, from Tim Phillips from... used to be the interim director of AARO. Without any further delay, let me jump into the back. And actually, you know what? Let me just go ahead really quick and welcome our audience. Who the heck do we have out there? Something I do on a regular basis. We've got Anonymous Rex all the way from Oregon. Carl Joel Garrison. Charmanian is here along with Conniving Bones. Craig Smith. Destiny Rocks is here along with Digger Dog. Eliza Teal, Idaho Strong. JB, J-Cat. Jeremy Martin's here along with John Mayett Lockett. We got Kathy and Kelly Bro with those piercing blue eyes. Who else is out there? We got Mr. Grimlock, Liberty Astro UK, Mr. Joey B, Reality Check VIP, Maritime Unprepared just popped in along with Jeremy Marlin, and who else? We've got all the names are popping up. Welcome everybody. Who else we have out there? We've got Rodney Cox, Sandra Jute, Stephen Forbes, Super Unknown, the Chromosome Cowboy, and Two Heads 666. And let's jump back into the studio. Mike, how are you, my friend? We lose
Doing well, Thomas. Yeah, we have a lot to cover today. It's going to be a hell of a show. Looking forward to it.
It should be. It should we. Now, Mike, if you want to do the introduction or not, I can. We've got our special guest in here today, Ivan Hannel. It sounds like there's some interesting things going on. I've seen some tweets out there. You were spotting to Ivan's. You want to fill in the audience?
Sure. Ivan has a client, and every time you use that phrase publicly, first thing people assume is that we're talking about Lou Elizondo.
No, we're not today, are we? Nope.
No, we are not. I had to make it clear to the public that Ivan represents quite a few different clients. Lou is only but one of them. And that the client he is representing, aside from Lou, is somebody who is a witness to advanced drone technology going back decades, which is in itself a revelation just by the details of this story. And Ivan has been speaking about it on his account publicly. Mm-hmm. And it's one hell of a story.
Oh God, yeah.
There's a lot going on with Wall Street Journal and Tim Phillips and Eric Burleson, who are talking to the public about various aspects of this. But it all does seem to tie into this particular story with Ivan and his client.
Yeah.
And I'll let Ivan.
Now, before we get to
further.
Ivan, just to go ahead and set the story on this, I want to go ahead up here and I want to show a quick video clip that's coming to us from Reddit. Representative Eric Burleson discussing about him meeting with a U.S. military contractor. The guy's not a contractor, it's a faux pas, but who claims to have captured video footage of aerial objects demonstrating breakthrough technology. He says it's not alien, it's United States defense contractors that have breakthrough technology, which goes back to the drone situation we saw earlier this year. Let me go ahead and bring up this short video clip from Reddit. Let's go ahead and play it and see where it takes us. Here we go, everybody. Wait a minute. Hold on. Audio's off. Start again. Make sure I can see the audio, what the audience can hear. Let's try it one more time.
I was visited by a military contractor from my part of the United States, the Midwest, who makes his own drones for the U.S. government. And in the course of testing his drones, flying his drones, he's captured footage and photos of some other some competitors and their advanced products that are flying. And he claims that he has video footage of breakthrough technology, but it's not alien. This individual, and he's not ready to come forward yet. I'm going to go meet with him, but he says it's not alien. It is it's United States defense contractors that have breakthrough technology.
Well, there we go. Let's jump back into the studio here if we can. Mike, great introduction talking about this. Ivan, my friend, welcome to the show.
Hey, nice to see you guys again. Nice to see everybody.
Mike?
Thanks. Good to see you too, Ivan. Appreciate it. You're a good friend, and you really seem to be very busy lately. This is a really interesting story. That's a little outside what we usually cover about UAP, but I think it's equally fascinating that the U.S. has been developing this type of technology, which can be directly attributed or associated with UAP technology. And this has been going on, according to your client, for over several decades now, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it, but I would just kind of like first sort of correct the record. First of all, he's not a military contractor, former or present. So that's sort of that's a mischaracterization. Second, I don't know that I guess Representative Burleson said that he used his drones to, I guess, ascertain or learn certain things. That his initial experience was not using one of his own drones, let's say. So just kind of a clarification on some, when people talk, they talk kind of just sort of conventionally and without a lot of precision, and we all do it. I do it too. So, but just for the record, he's not a military contractor, and his initial experience, which was decades ago, not several decades, but decades ago, before the Nimitz, let's say, was in person, let's say. So yeah, it's a very interesting. And he's not a new client. He's one that I've had for 8 months, or I think something like that. So I've known of this story for 8 months, but just in general, I can be talking to people for a long time before anything comes out. And to the extent that I've said anything, it's only because my client wanted me to come forward with some information and begin possibly engaging the public in a more direct way. But those are always his choices. I would just lastly add, as I kind of mentioned before, just in general conversation, I, as an attorney, my point of view, although, I'm pro-disclosure, don't make a secret about that, but my duty and my loyalty is to the individual client, not to disclosure as a concept. And of course, everybody has their own version of disclosure. So even if I said I was, disclosure was my first duty, and it would mean something different to everybody anyway. But I guess, so I guess what I'm just trying to communicate is, I'm here with his permission. I am here to begin to give some information. Much information is his to give, not mine. I can't confirm myself personally every aspect of the story. There's limits to what I've been exposed to. But there, thankfully, Tim Phillips, the gift who, keeps on giving. I found it very interesting his dialogue with Mick West on Mick West podcast. And if you contextualize it, even more broadly, with this recent campaign of articles in the Daily News, Wall Street Journal, this New York Post interview, and then these very, I would call them obscurant or almost random, but they're not random, but this very strange segue in the conversation, which frankly Tim Phillips does quite often when he talks to people. He doesn't answer the question that's asked. He answers the question that he has in his mind. I don't know why that is. It's something about his behavioral pattern, sort of a behavioral pattern, but it's pretty easy to see that he takes the question, as many of us do, kind of runs with it, kind of like I'm doing right now. But for a guy whose primary job seems to be to find dead ends, he's making some mistakes in that process, and thankfully so. So yeah. That's the overview, is that I think this is an inadvertent, and I can talk us through the steps, but I think this is an inadvertent admission, because Tim Phillips is up on every podcast talking, whether with or without the permission or at the direction of AARO. in support of a campaign which is essentially intended to suppress the inquiry into UAP and resolve it in some sort of finality with a coming AARO report as being a conventional form, but interesting and highly advanced form of regular technology. But all I can say is that there would be no way, in the same way that when we first saw the F-117 fighter, the fighter that we used in the first Gulf War, I believe, the black, I forget what it's called, but anyway, when we first saw it, it was very unusual looking and it seemed very advanced, but it was still, it still required positive lift. It still required the jet engine. It still requires wings, and plus, high-tech control mechanisms because it's so weirdly shaped. But that's really, not the kind of technology we're talking about. We're talking about something that would be quite unusual, right? And so that begs the question then of where did that technology come from, sir?
Right.
There's a lot of questions to be asked, but I can talk you through. But first, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, if I could, really quick before Mike jumps into it, in the interview that I was with Tim Phillips, he flippantly goes ahead and calls out your client for trying to extort the government for the information that he's bringing forward. It seems like he's trying to throw the guy under the bus.
That is absolutely the case. And, this is a witness who was repeatedly asked to go to AARO, not just once. Remember, we hear about these witnesses who were called and literally had to call them back and say, do you need anything more from me? And they're like, no, we're good. This is a guy who was called back in. This is a guy who was directed to AARO by Senator Rounds. That's the member. And he's met with, he has the proof of all of that. So this is a very interesting. I have my own sort of holistic explanation for what I think is happening, that kind of makes sense of all these sort of disparate facts. And maybe it's not too striking an observation, but I think it's ultimately one where disclosure is being intentionally suppressed. AARO is not a very great organization, I'll admit it, but it's intended to be that way. And whether you defund it or not, it's not going to change by their, from their point of view, from the people who oppose disclosure, AARO will succeed in its mission of discrediting everything as simply being, a bird or a hoax, an internal hoax, or advanced U.S. technology, but not so advanced that it makes you question where it came from. And that's, I think, the goal. And then the ultimate goal is to try to resolve it through legislation which proposes, kind of a long runway to disclosure, a controlled disclosure, when in reality you have to ask, well, why do we need the runway at all? Why can't you just tell us the truth now? Because you clearly know a truth that would be seemingly shocking to most Americans in terms of where we have come technologically and where that could have been, where that emanated from. What's the genesis of this very unique technology? So we have a lot to discuss, but again, you're right. He did he defamed, frankly, without leaving his, kept his identity secret. So good job, Tim. So you missed the defamation. One of the elements of defamation is you defame somebody very broadly, but without letting his name be known. But he did so in a very curious way. And we can talk about how that kind of gives you an insight into Mr. Phillips' mind of thinking. But he did defame my client, unfortunately, called him mentally unstable, said he wouldn't want him to be around his family. These are things that are not going to sit well with people, Tim. Maybe you should think about that before you talk on many, many podcasts, just a suggestion. So discrediting him, but at the same time, actually admitting that he brought back physical evidence, because Mick West asked, that of some very advanced U.S. programs, but he never alluded. The reason this story, maybe is yet to get the kind of traction it needs is, or deserves, frankly, is that there was no reference to what kind of technology that was. What was it, that he told AARO and SSCI about? And if what he is saying is correct and accurate, which again, I wasn't there. I don't know. I just have to take his proposition. But Tim Phillips himself now, confirms that what he presented is true or is real.
Right.
My guess is he'll scramble and they'll say, well, it was only this part was real, that part was real. But my client's principal proposition suggests an extraordinarily advanced U.S. technology that has at least one or more of the 5 observables, and therefore means that, begs the question of where does this technology has come from? And we can get into that later, and also Senator Round's recent interview with Ross Coulthart, because through that interview, if you kind of look at it through the lens of what a smart person is going to say, even though many people found that interview banal or not saying much. In fact, if you actually look carefully, because remember, I just want to last thing to say on this, Senator Round, when he speaks, he thinks before he speaks. So everything that he's saying is intended to produce, it's not like I think something and I just say it out. I'm afraid some of the others in the House may be just more like, I get information here and it goes right out my mouth. Okay. But in this instance, Rounds is very, I would just say, thoughtful about how he composes his speech. And so you always have to ask yourself, not just what is he saying, but why would he say it the way he does? What must be in his repository of known facts or assumptions that produce him to say something that leads you to believe something? If you start looking at their speech from that perspective, rather than, I just want to pass the UAP, it becomes, it's too simple. So you need to look at why people are saying what they're saying more so than just what they're saying. And if you can come up with a theory or an understanding of that, then you can understand their motive, their intent, and why they put out the things they do. So I'm sorry that's so long-winded, but it is quite, a series of inferences that you can put together and come to an overall picture, which is frankly pretty interesting.
Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, it's beyond interesting at this point, Ivan.
Yeah,
I think you're right the way you assessed it, I got to tell you. The Wall Street Journal article that the government had put out as a propaganda piece against disclosure, inadvertently have people like Burleson and Tim Phillips coming out to try to corroborate some of those outlandish claims.
It's not inadvertent. There's no way that Tim Phillips didn't know well in advance of this article. So just to be clear, this is the probability that all of these media pieces would occur within a 2-week period and Tim Phillips would go on a speaking tour, I think is pretty low.
Oh,
Well, it wasn't accidental.
Right. So it's not
I
inadvertent,
agree.
it's intentional.
well, talking about accidental things, do you think Susan Goff could be involved in this to a degree?
I cannot
She was.
speculate. I'm not going to speculate.
She was because,
All right.
well, I can, because it came out publicly that the Wall Street Journal article had stated that they consulted both with Susan Goff and Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick before they did this article, and a lot of the information that were contained in the article came directly out of the horse's mouth. So that was confirmed through Wall Street Journal already. We know that. They definitely are involved with this piece. Also, the historical report part 2 that's going to drop at the end of this year is going to contain a lot of the same points that came out in the Wall Street Journal article. So they were trying to put this out there publicly through the Wall Street Journal to get the public's reaction, because they have full intentions on putting this in the official report. But because of all of this propaganda going on, they now have Tim Phillips on a speaking tour. And he already had another interview that he did recently with Stephen Greenstreet right after the Wall Street Journal article dropped. And one of the things that came out from Tim Phillips from the Greenstreet interview was, from the New York Post, is that Tim Phillips said a lot of people will look up in the sky and see something that they believe to be a UFO, when in reality, he knows personally, because the work that AARO was doing, they confirmed this with aspects of the government that said you could see technology that looks like it came right out of Star Trek. But in reality, it's actually our technology that we developed and we've been operating, and we don't want the public to know. So he has been confirming these things that your client was sharing with you without realizing that the other shoe had dropped, meaning when he makes a statement like that and there's no corroborating information that's known publicly, people can either take what he's saying at face value or dismiss it. And he made these statements not thinking somebody like your client, or you for that matter, would bring this information out publicly, which then turns what he was saying into confirmation of sorts. Does that make sense to you, Ivan?
That's a long kind of set of assumptions, but it is, I don't know what's in his head, but or what the global plan is. But I would say that, to the extent that, in one respect, I mean, it's odd that he would malign my client because to some extent, my client does propose a confirmation in part of what he says, that this is a very advanced U.S. tech. But when they say advanced U.S. tech, what they're not clarifying or qualifying here is that it is of a sort that displays some of the 5 observables, at least one, if not 2, perhaps others. And
Right.
These are not available to us. They weren't available, to my knowledge, in 2003, and to my knowledge, or 2002, or whatever, whenever before the Nimitz one, whatever.
Or in 2025.
Or today. They don't. This is not. This is not the stuff that we can do, or we. I guess I assumed we could do. So it's remarkable, but I can piece it together if you'd like. You already played the Burleson piece, correct?
Before you get to that, Ivan,
Sure.
I got one more thing to add to this from Tim Phillips.
Okay.
He made a comment in that interview we did with Stephen Greenstreet, and what he said was that the U.S., and he knows this firsthand, confirmed that the U.S. is in possession of advanced technology that you would mistake for a Klingon death ship. Now, there is no such thing, anyone who follows Star Trek, of a Klingon death ship.
Bird of prey is what he probably means.
Yeah, bird of prey, exactly. Our bird of prey, yes.
My wife was a Trekkie, so she corrected me as well.
Oh, so am I, and so is Thomas. So we're well aware of the terminology. But he made that statement, and he didn't know what he was quite talking about accurately, but he put it out there. And that was another form of confirmation of kind of what your client has been describing. Well, he didn't even realize that he was going to do that by making that dumb statement with the way he phrased it, but he did. So now lead us into the background as far as how your client came out with all this and what's going on.
I really can't give, his story, like I always say, and again, just going back to it, is I'm not here to tell his story for him. He'll make that choice when and if he does, and whatever forum he does. So I can only allude to it generally. Remember, I, as an attorney, again, I take it seriously that I'm sort of guided by my client's best interests as they see it, not necessarily what I see it. So, I give my advice, but they may choose a path or a different path than I'd suggest, or the exact path. That'll never, that never gets known. But my point is that I'm not here to retell the story, except, beyond just the general ideas that before the Nimitz, he had an encounter that was very close up. The object displayed, from what he says, certain properties that are unmistakably some of the observable properties, and that he pursued knowledge and information about what was to him at the time, a very strange moment. And he came to believe, he came to acquire, due to his background and some other things, he began to figure certain things out about this system. And eventually, again, going back all those years, if you were, if it was 2002, let's say, and you were out there, and I'm not saying it was, I'm just saying, let's say, whatever, if you're in the early 2000s, who do you go report any of this to? You seem like a lunatic, right? You're just reporting, you're on Ancient Aliens or something at that point. I mean, that's just the idea of how you'd be perceived. And of course, nobody's going to admit, oh yeah, sorry, that was ours. So in any event, but over time, more recently, after AARO was eventually stood up, but before that, he went to his home state senator. He then was directed to the office of Mike Rounds. Then he was directed from there to AARO for whatever reason. And his experience with AARO was extremely negative and threatening. And,
of course it was. And he even met with Kirkpatrick, I believe, right?
Yes, I think I put that in the tweet. And
right.
But in any event, he met with AARO, and they were very interested. And but anyway, what's really interesting, but nothing came of it except for threats. And again, he approached them from the perspective. I mean, the absurdity of thinking that somebody goes to the United States government and says something to the effect of, if you don't buy this, I'm going to go sell it to Putin. I mean, that's completely insane. Nobody does that, okay? Or China or wherever. So, I mean, nobody does that. This is absolute stupidity on the part of AARO to propose that is even a possibility. I mean, it's so absurd as to defy credulity. However,
so let's clear that up for the audience for a second, Ivan.
Hold on. What'd you say? What's your question?
Let's clear this up for the audience for a second here. If the claims that AARO had been making about your client committing criminal activity, one might even say treasonous, if in fact any of that was true during the time that he was communicating with them, and they were aware of that, don't you think that they would have fully prosecuted him to the fullest extent of the law, and he would have been charged officially and been facing federal criminal charges if in fact he did what they said he did? And in reality, that never occurred, did it?
No, that was never the case. He was really, I mean, just like, imagine you're a person of some sophistication technically, you see something very unusual, you begin to figure it out, and you finally have a place you can, sort of the topic comes into the mainstream, and through some great efforts, he got in touch with the political side of things, and then was directed to AARO. I mean, you don't provide all this information. It's just utterly idiotic to malign him with having a bad intent. His only intent was one of a few things. One is, obviously, he's a curious person. So, one is what is this stuff? Like, what is this stuff? Two is, okay, some aspects of it, you need to know may not be as robust as you may want. Okay, that is to say, I was able to figure things out, and if I can do it, perhaps others could too who don't have a positive view of the United States. Three is, if this is not U.S. tech, well then whose is it? Because they have an advantage over us that would be shocking.
Yeah,
and make all our present technology
obsolete.
Convention, the convention, the F-35s, they wouldn't stand a chance.
Yeah. No.
And so you say, well, and then you see, even more recently, the impact of very conventional drones, the Mavic or DG, in Ukraine and in Iran, just regular old drones.
Spiderweb that Ukraine had committed against Russia, which was amazing with conventional technology.
Yeah, and then you see the same thing with the Israelis in Iran taking out some of their early warning radars and so on, so that they could, hit some of these targets. You see all of that, and you realize that the drone threat. And I hate to go back to Lou Elizondo, and again, these two clients have nothing to do with each other. But I will say this: 7 months ago, Lou had the prescience, the insight, to say, hey, I think we need a national intelligence estimate to look at these three categories of objects: conventional drones, advanced drones, and perhaps what are described as UAP, right? And, you know, unfortunately, I mean, I don't know that anybody, you know, I think it was just a very smart approach, but, you know, people want to talk about all sorts of, you know, things that may be true. I'm not going to say that they, you know, I'm not going to disqualify them. I don't know about all these other things that people are talking about, you know, but I will say, and I've been saying this for a long time, the path to UAP is through the drones. If you get to the bottom of the drone issue, you get to the bottom of what's in the sky. And what's in the sky has a hell of a lot to do with why we're all here. So we did that and stopped focusing on other stuff. So I'm not saying the other stuff isn't true in the future, you know, but, you know, in a way, I mean, I'll just say this. If we're talking alien hybrids, as fun and interesting as that is, how you tell a story is important to the American people and to anybody, including people who are pro-disclosure. And when you get luminaries of disclosure leading other people to sort of go in the direction of alien hybrids and all this other stuff and spheres, which again, I mean, they're all interesting and they may all be true.
Booga, booga, booga.
This is not something that I think the American people, not that I don't want to, you know, them to understand the truth, but I'm just saying you have to tell a story that's comprehensible. And if you start out with alien hybrids, or if that becomes a topic, and then you intermix that with some very prosaic but extremely interesting facts, you get a story that has both elements of, you know, just it's unbelievable, and then there are parts that are believable, and then it ends up being a wash. And so to me, I thought, how can we now lose when the, you know, cabal of idiots has made several missteps, including this ridiculous media campaign through the Wall Street Journal, including, you know, Tim Phillips being a dummy and confirming what my client had to say. How can we lose disclosure? Oh, I know how we can, by switching over to alien hybrids and all that. And I mean, cool. Then the American people at that point. So I find it just, I mean, I can't predict what the American people would resonate with. They seem to have ignored the drones over their head pretty easily, but one day they won't be able to.
Yeah.
And so anyway.
Yeah. Now, did you want to replay the initial clip coming from Reddit, or do you want me to play the clip coming from the McWest interview?
You can play whatever you want.
Okay, I'll play it, and I will pause here and there and let you respond to it as it's going along. That way we hit fair use. How does that sound?
Yeah, I think it starts somewhere in the 44 minute. I don't know exactly.
Oh, I know. I've got it clipped right here, so we're set on that one.
McWest, and I'll just.
Oh God, yeah. Let's get to the
McWest. I think ask him a question. Go ahead and play the question, then we'll see.
I've got it, and we'll stop here and there. Let's go to that one there. Just make you a little bit smaller because you're hidden in that one. Let's bring it down. All right, let's go ahead and play it. Here we go.
If I was frustrated by some of the claims made by witnesses to members of Congress. I know that we had people referred to us. One particular individual, we thought he was extorting us.
Extorting us. There we go. That's
okay. I'm sorry, but you missed the question. So let's actually go back to the question to which he's responding. If you can. So
I can't. I'm clipped right down to this point of this particular clip. Well, you know what the question was by chance?
I don't, but there's a reason why I want you to go, if you don't mind, to the question itself. And I'll just characterize, I'll give you a second too. But
I don't know what it is.
Tim Phillips, I think the question that McWest asked was something to the effect of, what was it like dealing with the UAP task force in general? Mm-hmm. Sort of that kind of question. And I think he probably felt it wasn't very good. So he decided not to actually even answer a question about, you know, which he could have answered very clearly or easily, and just said, you know, working with UAP task force was complicated and interesting. I think they have the best intent for the, you know, he could have given a nice, simple answer. But instead, the strangest thing happens, and he answers a question nobody asked. And you have to ask yourself, again, going to the psychology of the individual, why is he answering a question that nobody asked? Or very indirectly, right? Like instead of talking about the task force, he talks about the task force sending him or AARO certain witnesses, including my client. But the question wasn't, you know, so narrow as to prompt were there any people that the task force sent you who you found to be unqualified or oppositely very, very correct or true? That wasn't the question. So he answers a question that he had on his mind. And the question is, why does he bring up my client, an anonymous person, out of nowhere? I think he did so because he saw Eric Burleson's earlier comment that he had been meeting with my client. And that prompted some concern in his head to start talking about what was in his head. So what was in his head is this perceived, I don't know what you'd call it, worry or concern that, my client has something legitimate to say. Anyway, so if you want to keep going, we can, but
we can. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that clip around. I could get to it, but it's going to take some time to try and find out.
So what did he say up till there? He just said that client was weird, or
here we go. Let's get into it.
Members of Congress. I know that we had people referred to us. One particular individual, we thought he was extorting us. We were either going to pay him for his knowledge or his materials, or he was going to take it to a foreign country.
Yeah, look, nothing could be further from the truth. My client is a patriotic American. He sat on this information he's been working it and developing it, but his understanding, has been almost 2 decades. In those 2 decades, he says he has, and I believe he will reveal more about what he told AARO, but certainly I think, other countries may have been interested in it. I'm not going to speak for him. He can speak to any of that as he wishes, but the idea that he would come to AARO to tell them he was going to sell something to, China is insane. And it's just preposterous, but it shows you the sort of degree of malignancy, the degree of this is what people who even want to help AARO, who have a curiosity, even if they have, a desire to, do some business, whatever it is, as an entrepreneur, which is, very American, you're getting roadblocked here. You're getting maligned. And this represents not just, and I will tell you, this does not just represent my client. I've spoken to other people who've gone before AARO, and they say they have had very, very not nice experiences with Tim Phillips and Sean Kirkpatrick. So, and again, not speaking about Lou.
No, but we've heard that from Mario Woods, and we've also heard from Bob Salas about the schmuckery that went on at AARO. Correct, Mike?
We've talked about it live on the show. It was any witnesses that seemed to have directly appeared to testify at AARO. It was a real shit show. They were treated poorly. They were ignored, a lot of it. And there was also cross-contamination between the interview that was being officially conducted at AARO with these witnesses on like the old party lines, where they were using what they claimed was a secure phone line, but in reality was tapped into other people who were also speaking about classified information. AARO never recorded the information that they were taking from the statement of these witnesses, like in Bob Salas's case. They actually called him up weeks later after the interview and asked him if he had any notes from it, because they weren't able to locate any of the information that they were supposed to have after his initial interview. So AARO was just really dealing very poorly with these people who had come forward. I don't know what your client's experience was, but I'm sure it wasn't that far off.
His was worse, obviously, because, he was, they claimed he was, intending to commit an act of treason, essentially, which is insane. This is not the way you commit acts of treason. You don't go to your U.S. senators and get directed to the Senate Select Committee of Intelligence and have meetings there in SCIFs, and then go to AARO and have more meetings. This is not the way you achieve. I don't know what they're thinking. So it's very strange. But let's keep on going to get to
All right, we're 29 seconds into almost 3 minutes. So here we go.
sounded like extortion to us and reported it to our FBI counterparts. And by the way, we actually had at various times FBI, agents or analysts who were part of the AARO staff. So we did work very, very closely with the FBI. So
that was some physical material that he had. It
was.
Okay, let's stop.
There we go.
So obviously, Mick West asked a smart question, which is, well, what did he have? Did he have physical material? And he does. But let's keep. So it's remarkable that he confirms. Mick West asked a good question, and Tim Phillips says, "Oh yeah, he had physical material." Now let's hear what. As a result of my client's physical material, what is, does Tim Phillips just say, oh, it was very normal stuff, stuff that you could find from a shell casing or a old aerospace part? No. What happens to Tim Phillips? You keep going.
Absolutely. Let's get back to that and continue on. Hold on. Here we go. Let's get there. And all right, one more. Let's continue.
I actually went back to members of this member's staff saying they should protect the member from this individual. It wasn't fair to him to give him an audience. I am not a medical professional, but what I heard, based off common sense, I wouldn't want him around my family.
Bam!
Okay.
That is a tough, couple things.
So this is what you're getting from AARO. So when people understand more broadly, it's probably, obviously not just my client's experience, but to claim that he's not a medical professional, but he's suggesting that he has a mental imbalance and that he's threatening. Look, I've talked to the guy over 8 months. There's no imbalance there. I mean, everybody has different ways they communicate, but I mean, the idea that he's mentally imbalanced or, it's just such a strange comment, but you can tell that you have to ask yourself, why is Tim Phillips talking about this anonymous person who nobody knows about, calling him mentally ill, saying he's extorting things? I mean, what is the fear that Tim Phillips has that he's trying to address on TV or, YouTube or whatever, in response to a question that wasn't really directed towards anything like that?
If anything, for people who know this stuff, Ivan, it's that the greater the claim of what's coming in, the more they're going to deny and try to throw the person under the bus. And I think that's what we're seeing here, right?
I definitely think they're trying to do a number of things. He's mentally unhinged, but he's also trying to extort us. But also the materials he has, well, I guess, as you see, if you continue the clip, he goes back to the committee or the chairman, and the chairman, of SSEI. So anyway, you can continue with the clip, and you'll see what he does with this insane person's information. And physical material. He already discarded and said he shouldn't even have the ability to bring this stuff forward, which is crazy. So let's just... Because they don't want people coming forward with bona fide information, because they have to figure out a way to discredit it, to deal with another set of facts that they don't like to deal with. Because remember, AARO is a place where disclosure goes to die. Having said that, I disagree with defunding it. But anyway, keep going.
All right, here we go.
Did he even get into the position to be able to approach you with this type of thing?
It was referred to us by members of this staff. It came to us.
Okay.
So members staff, meaning members of the House of Representatives, right?
No. Mike Rounds.
It's from the Senate then?
Yeah.
So I won't call them, I guess you call members of the Senate, but it's more of senators. But either way, let's continue. Here we go.
Well, who knows? I mean, I can't speak for where he got his information, but that's my understanding. I could be wrong, but my understanding is it was not a representative who directed him there. Now, maybe he got the word from a representative. I don't know. You can only parse this so far, but
yeah. All right, here we go.
And we were asked to interview, and we did. And there was concern that some of the materials that he possessed could compromise actual programs of record. when I actually met with the chairman over this issue, he had asked.
The chairman,
Hold on a second. So what's funny is that Mick West's reply to me on Twitter and in some sort of Eric Weinstein thread, he says, are these just, we had RC cars and helicopters back in the day too. I'm like, well, Mick West, based on what Tim Phillips is saying, this is not about RC planes or whatever it is, radio controlled planes or conventional helicopters that would prompt Tim Phillips to have a talk with the chairperson of this committee, the Senate Select Intelligence Committee, in order to then be directed to go to the Nevada test site, aka I guess Area 51, to figure out what's going on, right? Like, if he had come in and just brought in some sort of little drone of some conventional form, Mick West, or anything like that, nobody would be departing for. Nobody would be, you wouldn't go back and say, well, Senator so-and-so, and I don't know if it was Rounds or not, but it might have been another senator. But the point is that with whom he met, 'cause I don't know who was the chairperson. It may have been Tom Cotton. I don't know. But whoever it is, this chairperson that Tim Phillips went to see, obviously said, you need to go, as you continue the clip, he says, you need to go to get read in and go to the Nevada test site to learn some things. So you can continue.
Sure, here we go.
Asked me if I had been actually visited to the Nevada test site, and I had personal knowledge of some of the technologies that were being tested out there. And I told him, no, I haven't. And he highly recommended that I get out there, get read in and understand what was going on, because he was afraid that programs could have been compromised. So that's one reason, I went out to the Nevada test site.
Well, listen to that, though, Ivan. I have to bring this up. After getting advised that he should go out to the Nevada test site and get read in, he actually went. So although he's trying to talk and defame the guy, it sounds like they actually took some of the information with a grain of salt.
I'm sorry. What'd you say? Some of the information.
Well, your client had said that your client suggested that he should go out to the Nevada test site and get, talking about Area 51 and get read in on some of this stuff. And after that particular claim that your client had made, Phillips actually went out to the Nevada test site
Thomas, you're kind of, hold on. I just want to make sure we're clear. No, my client didn't say go to Area 51. It's the chairperson of the committee.
Got it. Said to go to 51.
Who said, look, you've seen some things. Obviously he relayed whatever. First of all, my client met with Senate Select Committee on Intelligence prior to going to AARO. So he was referred by them to AARO. So whatever he told AARO went back, there was some degree of overlap there. But first of all, I also find it kind of funny that the deputy director of AARO is doesn't have the information necessary to discriminate between UAP and non-UAP, so he has to go get read in. This is prompted by my client showing him some things, or at least talking to him, I suppose more likely. And ultimately, Tim Phillips goes back, talks to some chairperson. I don't know precisely who it was, but I can guess, and then gets referred to go to Area 51 or the Nevada test site, where he goes and says he learns a lot and is very surprised. And I think he goes on in the clip at some length to talk about how amazing that technology is. I don't remember exactly what follows next, but
all right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Sorry for misrepresenting that statement.
No, it's okay.
Listen, to clarify things a little bit here, Ivan. It sounds to me like the point that Thomas was making initially is that if your client had gone to AARO and shown them an Amazon drone, I don't think they would have been needing to go out to Area 51 and get read in on advanced technology that's being developed, would they?
And let alone technology from the early 2000s. I mean, this is
it's before drones.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think they had I think back in that time they had fewer, you're right, commercial, ones for purchase that you could.
For military, we had stuff that looked like planes that could go ahead and fly itself to a degree.
We did, and I'm sure we had Reapers or whatever they were called, or prior versions, and I'm not sure about all of that, but let me just put it this way: the what this particular drone that he made, or whatever you'd want to call it, that he saw was like I said, it displayed some of the 5 observables in a way that would, according to him, that would not leave it within the purview of 2003 commercially, or 2 or whatever commercially available technology, and it would not leave it in probably any known technology that we have today.
No, right. So we're going to 2025, and that technology is not something that's publicly known. Meanwhile, it seems again like they're taking the claims of your clients so seriously that they're pursuing it from the government end to find out what classified advanced programs currently exist. And I have a feeling that the information and material that your client had brought forward really lit a fire under their ass and got their attention. That's what it seems like to me.
I think that there's a degree of bureaucracy where, obviously Tim Phillips is saying, this is very weird, whatever it is, my client shared with him, or very interesting or very unusual, to prompt him to need to get read in and, to things. And later, Mr. Phillips. So in a way, there's a strange part of it, which is that my client actually supports, if you want to interpret it this way, there's a certain narrative where they're trying to say, this is all an attempt to say, look, guys, this is all just very advanced American technology, but they won't qualify how advanced it is.
Right.
And because they're not qualifying how advanced, they hope that people say, well, they think sort of by analogy, they're like, well, I remember when the F-117 came out, and that was really cool, but it wasn't like, and it was very advanced, but it wasn't, operating off of scientific principles that are unknown to most people.
That are defying the laws of physics as we know them, right?
Yes. So that's the thing. And, my client has, yes, I guess I'll let him tell all the, whatever details he decides to eventually come to share. But the point is again, remember, he's a well-intentioned person who's trying to apprise the United States, apprise government, apprise people that, not only that we have some very advanced technology, which is otherworldly, and might have some, civilizational benefits to consider in addition to whatever, need there is to reserve some of this for defense, which begs to, brings up a lot of questions about why it is that this is, frankly, world-changing technology, if it's true. Or at least this capability. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to assume it's a technology, and I'm going to call it a capability. Whatever that is, it would have civilizational benefits, and so you wonder why they need to suppress it. And I always try to think by analogy. So I think, well, maybe it's akin to where, we have an asymmetrical advantage presently. And so disclosing that there is this technology, of course, begs the question to other nations and other, and within internally in the United States of, well, where'd you get it? Where'd you get this stuff?
Yeah.
And that leads to maybe, UAP, NHI, who knows? It leads to a lot of other things. But in the short term, at least, I think that maybe there, and I could be speculating. Well, I am speculating, but as I've said on X, I think that the need to preserve even the existence of this technology, which again is not just one that would seem to have military applications. It would be one that is, it's not like a stealth coding where there's really no reason for us to have stealth in our regular lives. It's something more than that. That would be, why do you need to keep that from the American people of the world? Well, only things I can think of are some sort of race with other countries that, focus on maintaining or at least hoping to keep some asymmetric advantage so that, because there's a real cost to the secrecy, not only in maintaining or at least even establishing an advantage over other countries like China, but also there's a civilizational cost. Now, it's not for me to decide. That's more of a political issue, but it's something that you have to weigh and balance, like the nuclear power, nuclear weapons. They're similar in some respects, and so when you get one, you're likely to you kind of get the other sometimes, depending on how you produce that power, and or at least you get the materials for it. And so but the benefit of nuclear power is very high according to some people, and the risk but comes with this tremendously terrible attendant risk, and it can go down that. It's a lot of thinking to do on that. But anyway, with this technology, strikes me that what they've done, Tim Phillips, thank you, Tim Phillips, you confirmed what has always been a suspicion, what I've heard about in different people, other people, direct interviews, discussions, but he was just so nice to confirm it.
Yeah. Well, I've got about 20 more seconds. Want to hear the end?
Sure, let's play it. Let's play the rest of it.
Could have been compromised. So that's one reason.
Let me just back up a little bit here. Here we go.
And he highly recommended that I get out there, get read in and understand what was going on, because he was afraid that programs could have been compromised. So that's one reason. I went out to the Nevada test site.
Was that a helpful perspective on existing cases?
It absolutely was. To go out there to meet with the commanders, to look at the test articles, and you have a much better understanding why rational people who are not reading to the technology could actually think that this was derived or reverse engineered from an alien ET.
So it's just more of just clarifying the stuff that he saw, what he saw, and his interpretation of it.
Right. He's saying that he thinks that this technology could be mistaken for alien. Well, I mean, in what way? Obviously, when you think about, how a person says, I could see why this might be perceived as alien. Well, then they must be talking about some characteristics either of or akin to, the 5 observables, or 6. I mean, obviously the 6 is a biological effect, so that's no fun. But the other 5 are remarkable. And so if he's saying we have technology akin to that, then, well, which is it, sir? Because that, like I said, those technologies, if we had something that had instant acceleration or just positive lift without sort of any real surfaces of the kind that would normally be associated with that,
right?
And I'm not going to go into all the different things, but I will just say that it is clear to me, at least, if my client's story, and again, I see, I don't have direct exposure, so I have to rely on people to tell me things. But there was this is a very, just for your information, this is a fairly deliberative process, and not in the sense that I validated or could invalidate any of what he saw or has material wise, because there's a big danger. You could show me video of a UAP or an advanced American drone, and I could give my impressions, but it would be, I'm no expert. But I think that based upon what at least my client presented, and said, that this technology would have capabilities that could only be associated with the 5 observables. That having been said, therefore, the question is where that technology comes from. Again, what they're trying to do, and you can see it when you look sort of more holistically or globally, is they're trying to just explain this all away using almost anything kind of sticks against the wall approach. First, it's a small group of circular storytellers who are doing this for profit, maybe. Then you have a broader internal conspiracy to hide under the UAP banner anything that is moderately advanced. And somehow, each generation keeps saying, the next version, the latest missile, the latest plane is UFO technology. But, and I'm sure there was some of that, you see something strange and, if you saw the F-117 in 1989 flying around, you'd probably go like, what the hell is that? Because you never saw a black plane that looked weird and, it was, but this is different. This is different. But what my client says he saw and told and gave and has is not the kind of technology that can be, is not just a couple of levels up, but, much better F-22, a much better F-117, a much better missile. It's not like that at all. It can only be explained by there is a new kind of propulsion at work. There is a new something going on, which they figured out. And where did they figure it out? That's a big question. And why haven't you shared it with the American people broadly? What is the risk of doing so? Have you weighed that against the whatever advantage we're getting militarily for having that technology? These are important questions for democratic governance. So my client is a person who believes in our country, who is patriotic, who has never said anything negative, has never approached any other country. Go find that, bring those claims. No, he is a patriotic person who has a very, interesting, incredible story. And fortunately, Tim Phillips is there to support it.
Yeah, and pointing this back out again about your client, Ivan, in the past 22 years since this has been ongoing, he has never been officially charged or prosecuted for any crimes against this country, has he?
He certainly wouldn't have been prosecuted because he wouldn't be around, and he hasn't been charged. And in fact, he's received no information that would suggest he's under any restriction from moving forward. But again, it's because he's so patriotic and cares about the country that he not only did what he did, but he's also not coming out and sharing everything that he knows, because at least at this point, I can't speak to the future, but he certainly had every opportunity to say, no, here's all the goods, go at it. But he's not that guy, right? He's the American who wants the best for the country and tried to approach, legislators, obviously top legislators, government bodies directed to this very purpose. And what did he get for it, right? But fortunately, he didn't, he's not a former government employee. He's not a government employee, for better and for worse, because and he'll tell more of the story, but some of the assurances or promises that were made by AARO turned out to be obviously patently false. And because he didn't have an attorney at the time to represent him or consult with him, or didn't seem to, he didn't realize immediately that their promises were absolutely, obviously false in terms of protections, because first of all, the applicable rule set that they said they were, that he would be covered under was not the rule set at all. So right. I guess I'll just put it this way. You seem to have at least two, if not more, very, former now, but supposedly, I think, very disingenuous people in Sean Patrick and Tim Phillips campaigning on behalf of an executive agency. To my knowledge, I didn't know that I thought they quit or don't work for any nor I don't know what Tim Phillips' present status is. I believe I was told he was still employed by them until October, but I don't know if that's true or not. But my point is that nobody finds it curious that that a former government agency, the director and executive director, are part of a sort of a giant social media campaign to discredit all of this of the agency that was responsible for its investigation. How often do you see, the former government officials in that, immediately after leaving government employment, sort of lobbying against, it's extremely strange. It's extremely strange. So this is all orchestrated. And I think I'd like to go, if you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them directly. But I want to go to the next step of, if you think about it, what this all means, not beyond just the fact that, as incredible as it may sound, apparently the United States for several decades at least. And you can imagine if they were that advanced in that time, frankly, I'll tell you one thing, that other people who I've met over the last year talked about incidents in the early 2000s and mid 2000s and so on, and it just seemed impossible to me. I had a hard time, I'll admit, getting over the idea that we could have had such technology even 20 years ago, or 25
Right.
years ago. I had trouble just saying, wouldn't we have either figured it out entirely by now so that we could control it, or is there something about it that is sort of so that, like, for example, some of the genetic, like CRISPR technology and so on. I mean, there's no way to put that. It could have some very negative effects, and you can't put it back in the bottle, So is it akin to that, where you could get one lunatic who puts together a few things and then has the power of the sun, or, I don't know. But I don't know why it's just so strange. But all of it is so strange, but it fits, because if you look at their direction, they're proposing that this is all advanced, but not too advanced technology. It's all done in the national interest. You're all good people, but seeing things. And if you saw something, it was cool American tech, go about your business, sir. No big deal. Everything's fine. And here's an idea. Given all of that, why don't we remain seemingly open to the proposition that, maybe there could be UAP, right? Let's keep an open mind about this. Let's not, I want to seem fair and balanced. So I'm going to maybe even, have some legislation out there that talks about NHI, because you're not going to find it, right? You're going to get held up, and we're pushing the can down the road, into a committee and lots, and I get it, there's pros and cons to everything, but it just seems quite clear, even after Ross Coulthart's conversation with Senator Rounds, that the direction is they know what they know. They already know they have amazing technology that comes from where. And now they're saying, in this very nice way, we figured out most everything. It's all good, just real advanced American tech. Go about, go mow the lawn, go live your business. Everything's fine. And let's take care of the curiosity, which must be generated from, internal parts of the government, right? Because there's many Americans who are probably good patriots who in the armed forces or intelligence agencies who either know tremendous amounts, and I know some of them, or know bits and pieces and are just, like, this resolves it. It's like, don't worry, we passed some legislation. Although the legislation is laden with, the eminent domain provision, which would take potentially from, for example, my client, I believe, or at least that's a risk, what he has discovered. But notwithstanding that, this seems to me a way of sort of sealing the deal and postponing or forestalling any real disclosure to the American people by giving us just enough of what we want. That it says NHI a bunch of times, that they seem open to the possibility, all will be well, you can trust us. Meanwhile, what they already know is, if true, astounding and concerning. And so I think it's time, call me old-fashioned, but I think at some point you have to come to Jesus with the American people about what reality is. You don't have a democracy, not a meaningful one anyway. We don't have a republic. We don't have a nation if we're lying to each other, even to protect oneself. Even in the interest of protecting ourselves, there's limits to what we should protect. And the ontological knowledge is, one thing that you should be able to share. However, the way they pretend they're open to that is by pretending that, we'll study it a while and then we'll get back to you. There is I don't know what the motivation is that is persuading them that kicking this can down the road for another 10 or 20, 25 years, whatever it's going to be, is the way to go. But I can tell you, I don't think it's the way to go. And based upon, things I'm hearing and other people, that that maybe it's possible that, some other people will start to come forward. And I hope so. And I'll say one last thing for any of the whistleblowers out there, or so-called whistleblowers. Many of them have not been able to secure real legal representation, and have gone out at this alone. Even this this client that I represent went at it seemingly alone. I would just say, that's not a great idea. I don't think. Of course, I always remain open to helping people. I do this pro bono. I don't get money out of this. I lose money and time and sleep and all of that. But I do it because I think, the American people deserve truth, even if it's very uncomfortable for them. I don't think they need to be treated like children. We're land of the free and supposedly home of the brave. Let us be brave, or stop pretending we're free. It's just that. It's as simple as that.
Now, that makes perfect sense to me, Ivan. Very well said, by the way. What I wanted to add is that when we had the drone flap here in the Eastern Coast in November of 2024, which Thomas and I covered extensively, daily, when that was occurring. And at the time, President Trump was campaigning, and he addressed the American people and stated that he feels that the administration at the time, the Biden administration, should have no reason as to not explain to the American people what these objects are that they were experiencing. And that as soon as he would be elected, he was going to tell the American public the truth about all of this. When he did finally get elected, and when he finally did address this issue, he had simply stated that he knows that these drones over New Jersey were advanced tech for the drones that the United States is working on, and that he can't discuss it any further than that. But he wanted to let the public know there was no cause for alarm, nothing to see here, move along. Now, when I heard that, and now after you and I have been talking, I have a feeling that this does tie directly into the claims that your client has been making, without a doubt.
Well, first of all, to President Trump, obviously I have no connection to him, but I will say this. I've said this on X before. Whoever is the president before the president who announces or gives us disclosure, that person will be entirely forgotten. So to the extent that, if you're the president before the president who talks about disclosure, it doesn't matter what big, beautiful bill you passed. It doesn't matter what you resolved. Nobody will even remember your name. Yeah. It's like, who was the president before Lincoln? Okay. You know what I mean? You're not gonna be remembered. So if legacy matters, that's something to think about. But yes, I think the explanation given to the American people, certainly by President Trump, I believe it was through his spokesperson, although he may have spoken a few words about this. I don't recall all of them. But I do remember his spokesperson, I don't know her name, blonde woman, but she said something to the effect of, these were FAA-approved research drones. I mean, it's like, okay, that tells us nothing. But what's amazing is the American people have accepted the presence of these drones. And the concern is not only that these drones might be just American, and, you have a lot of problems with, why are you conducting tests of American drones over American Air Force bases and perhaps ships and cities? In the middle of the country, in the end, because there was the 2019 stuff over, I believe, Colorado, Nebraska. You have all these drones, and you see now the power of drones in the most prosaic, conventional way in Ukraine and Iran, and it preceded that. There were even, other drone instances. This was all, and the American people have entirely managed to ignore the drones over their head. And I'm telling you, this is a disaster, because are we sure that all of these drones over the East Coast are an American research project of very advanced technology that we can safely ignore? I don't think so. I think some of these may be from our main competitor in technology, maybe, and they may or may not be from elsewhere. And I don't know what that even means, but you hear the speculation. Yeah. I will say that, so just leaving it as that these drones are extremely. The drone issue has been brewing for a while. I remember there's a film, you can find it online. It's called Slaughterbots. I remember back, I think in 2017, 18, it came out, and I was like, wow, this is insanity. And it was a prediction of the future about the use of AI drones and, in swarms to it launched in civilian areas to achieve terrible effect and maybe even political
yeah, but
change.
that could be easily used with low technology, not even cutting edge stuff to go ahead in the swarm, and it could take out critical infrastructure easily.
Right. So, that's the basic. That's like the lowest level of threat that we face. Okay, that's the lowest level of threat. But then when you ramp it up to technology, which conceivably would allow orders of magnitude in ordnance delivery and precision in other things, you would be talking about a technology which is just an absolute game changer, at least the equivalent perhaps, because nuclear weapons, you blow up the whole city. Did you really want to do that? What do you can't take. You'd be talking about something that I suspect could be more useful. You really can't use nuclear weapons, especially without having them come back at you. Whereas this technology, maybe the first mover wins and wins. There is no, mutuality there. It's just done. I don't know what's going on, frankly, but I will say this: my client is a good human being. Seems to be a person who's cares about America and the American people. Cares about balancing, obviously, security versus potentially good things from any technology. Would never harm the American people or the American public, and was really looking just to use his entrepreneurial and scientific and technical skills to help figure out what was going on and what he's learned, and come to the benefit of the American government. But you can see the way it's working, the way it's playing out is a broad campaign to silence and to funnel all efforts into the future. And in the meantime, it's all good. We figured it out. Go back to your baseball game. Go back and drink your coffee. This is just some pretty cool American tech that might even look like, like alien, but it's not. It's just really cool. Well, wait a minute. Where'd you get it? And that's a real question that Eric Weinstein has been asking for some time, for years now, for example. He's been saying, what happened to physics in the 50s? Where did all these people go? I think that's a real good question, and I have no background by which to make any assertions about that. But I think there's a lot of questions that we need to get into, and the real question is the American people ready for it? And they are. We're ready for it, I think. I mean, we've got to have these discussions. We're not saving anything. To those, whoever's out there who, either is withholding information that they know or is in control of, withholding information, you are doing no service to our country, to our democracy, to our nation by hiding from us what reality is. We have to face the reality of our country. We have to face the reality of this technological change in many areas, in AI and our food and global climate change and all these things. But we can, if we're rational and reasonable and communicate together, Americans can do such good work that no other nation, frankly, can do, right? If we do it well with good intentions. But if we hide from ourselves and from others and malign and even propose absurdities like we've deceived our own people at the highest levels using this quote unquote UFO ploy or decoy, we have done tremendous wrong, and you have done a wrong that is the gravest of wrong. You've imperiled the democratic function of the United States. Have you lost your fucking mind? That's what I'd say.
Very well said. Exactly. Good points. And I'll add to that we know that with this advanced drone technology that our government has been in possession of and working on for decades now, they have no intention after all this time of willingly bringing this information forward to the American public. They won't do it unless they don't have a choice, unless someone like your client will come forward with all the proof, information, and materials that they have about this type of technology and brings it out publicly so that now the government cannot continue to lie about it. Their hands become tied. They have no choice but to admit up to its sheer existence. If your client comes forward with what he knows and what he has, they will no longer have the option to continue lying about this like they have been doing for decades now. So I think if your client does in fact come forward, and I certainly hope he does, that would be a step in the right direction, because now it would no longer give the government an out that they have been exploiting this entire time when faced with this type of evidence.
Well,
So
I mean, again, I hear you, but remember, I mean, he's also a patriot, and so coming out with all of this is, you know, he has to be thoughtful about that, I think, because again, you know, he is a patriot and doesn't want to, you know, give secrets away that, you know, could harm our country. I mean, whatever, and I don't know what those, you know, secrets are in particular. I don't have the technical or other background that would allow me to vet it, but I would suspect that Tim Phillips, having gone to Area 51 or wherever he went, and saw what he saw because of what, you know, he said he was presented with from my client. Yeah, it's something for, you know, I think that my client, again, is a cautious person who wants to have every opportunity to work cooperatively with the government. He is not a UFO person, or, you know, he's not a disclosure person. Doesn't mean he's against it, but he's just interested in more the science and the technology, and helping the government ascertain or assess the, you know, some of the risk factors that may be making some of this technology less not as optimal as it should be. But that's all that I know. You know, I just know that it was a very surprising but you know, confluence of events that allowed me to reasonably conclude that, you know, despite a tremendous amount of smoke, there was a lot of things I looked at which, you know, established many of the claims of my client, although I did not go into all of them, and I can't say that I've seen everything or anything like that. So for many reasons, I would choose not to, and my client is very discreet. So, but the fact that, you know, Tim Phillips is out there talking about him, and in such a malignant way for no reason. I mean, what an unforced error, just like the Wall Street Journal article. They're making a bunch of unforced errors. I have no idea why they're doing it. They're, you know, poorly managed in some respects. Whoever you are, you got to get better at your secrecy.
Well, I could give you an observation. It sounded to me like the way Tim Phillips was talking about your client, I picked up very strongly on a degree of hostility that was coming from Tim Phillips towards your client.
Yeah, that's true.
That it was obvious to me. So not only, and let's, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Ivan, but to clear it up for the audience, the way I see it is that your client had come forward to the government because, being a subject matter expert and with what he knew, he wanted to advise and assist the government in dealing with, I believe, some of the vulnerabilities that he detected with their technology that he wanted to help with. And instead of them dealing with him as a patriot, they threw him under the bus, mistreated him, and are now showing a degree of anger and animosity.
You can imagine how they treat people who maybe were within the government and had similar concerns. Can you imagine how they treat people who are within the government and, you know, come with their own? I mean, they've this is, you know, to the extent that AARO is a disaster, sure, right? But destroying it and then passing legislation to sequester all knowledge of this into, you know, the distant future, essentially, even though the legislation doesn't necessarily require that. But you can imagine if they've been this successful over time, over at least the last 70 years of keeping this suppressed, and looking at the lack of curiosity of the American people, frankly. I mean, they accepted or ignored all the drones over the East Coast in Colorado. They don't pay attention to the fact that even conventional drones were recently used to such great effect in Iran and Russia. The American people just don't want to deal with fear. And drones of the conventional variety, of these very advanced variety, and perhaps of whatever else is up there or wherever it is, they don't want to deal with it mentally, it seems. I mean, I got to be honest, we're all pro-disclosure people for the most part in some respects, to varying degrees, right? I consider myself sort of moderately pro-disclosure in the sense that, I demand truth, but I don't want to give, some tremendous power. I don't want to give the crazy people anything,
right.
harm this with. It's pretty easy. And
conspiracy theories, I agree with you on that.
Plus, I also don't want to, I also don't think even maybe the benefits of this technology, whatever it is, are really congruent with necessarily a happier and more civil society. I think we always think that the next generation iPhone is going to solve all our problems in life, and it just doesn't, and whether it's the iPhone or something that allows you to travel very quickly, very far, very whatever, I mean, there's benefits. I'm not saying there aren't, but so, I mean, people don't know this, but when I was at Yale back in 89 and 93, one of my professors was this guy named Galertner, and I went into office hours and, talked to him for a minute because I was having some trouble with something called Stacks. It was like some Macintosh database program. I knew I was terrible at all that stuff. And I remember asking him for help, and I asked him to show me something on the computer, and he couldn't because his arm was he told me he was a victim of the Unabomber. And from then I, ended up reading that manifesto, and he was subsequently caught, I think because it was published actually. Mm-hmm. But I do recognize that technology doesn't lead always to great happiness. So I have concerns about both the weaponization of such technology, as well as even if it was wonder, had many potential, great potential for wonder, would also have some, would not necessarily go the way we think. But despite that, I mean, at the end of the day, to lie, it's one thing to lie and to hide things from the American people and our congressional representatives, and create all this stupidity within the executive and the military and the intelligence agencies, just seems like a bad, just doesn't seem like the way to go to me.
But I'm also sure that you would agree that the American public, the taxpayers that have been funding this type of technology all along without knowledge or direct knowledge of it, they have a right to know that it exists, don't they, Ivan? In your opinion?
I don't know. Well, there's no, just because you're a taxpayer doesn't, I can't go and inspect the inside of a Virginia class sub, right? So it's a variety of different things. It's really, or is the Congress adequately informed? But at some point, I mean, you do have to ask yourself, well, what would be the problem of saying, look, there is something called UAP, and we have derived some technology from it. And now, granted, maybe that produces an arms race where every little country is out there trying to now find how to get this technology. And so that maybe some countries have sort of taken our word for it that there's nothing there, and have not endeavored to really put money and effort into figuring out what UAP are.
Right. But it's more than the technology. It's about the things that are flying these craft potentially, the reason they're here, what they're doing here. The military just cares about the tech. They care about the ship, the propulsion methods, what they can be used for war. What hasn't come out, which goes against everything in humanity, is why are they here? What are they doing?
Right. Those are the two questions I always say we need answers to. What's in our skies and what do they want? If we could just get those two answers, a lot of people would be reasonably satisfied. I think we could get a reasonable explanation, which does not, create a catastrophe for probably either, our defense, our common defense, or shatter civilization. Now, after experiencing COVID and all that, you kind of think that the American people are less strong than they used to be, but you don't get strong by protecting people. You get strong by telling people the truth. That's how you make a strong country, is you start telling each other the truth. And it's because we don't tell each other the truth and we are operating under stigmas. Sometimes it's a very strong liberal stigma for, all the stuff that the liberals have come to believe, like Hamas is great or 7 different identities or whatever. And then the Republicans, with their crazy stuff too, that Ukraine is a bad country and Putin's a pretty decent dude. They're nuts too. Unfortunately, we're stuck between literally a rock and a hard place, between two parties which both have incredible irrationality going on, and we just accept it like it's okay. We choose sides and we ignore the sins of our own side. And right now, unfortunately, though, it seems like there's been a bipartisan sin that's been ongoing for a long period of time to not tell the American people about what's going on. Maybe because of the technology, maybe because, as you're saying, the next step is, well, where there's a machine, there's something propelling it. So is there some NHI, and what did they want? And at that point it becomes, for me, it's fairly incomprehensible, because obviously I'm not an experiencer, and but I just like to even get to the basic UAP. I just want to get to UAP as a starting point. When we, if you want to talk about alien hybrids, if that's what you want to talk about, great. Or
don't even need to get to that point.
Sure.
But if the military doesn't want us to talk about energy systems and kind of how the shit works and everything, I'm fine with that. Just let's talk about the bigger thing. They
like us talking about hybrids and speculative things, which may be true. I'm not taking any opinion on.
I usually say, if you want to see a hybrid, look in the mirror.
Right. So, especially since I call myself the reptilian lawyer just for fun.
I did not know that.
What'd you say? I
did not know that.
Yeah, it's in my X profile. It's for fun, because I'm pretty, like at 54, I got 10, 20, 30, 40 years, who knows how long I have on this planet. And truth is important to me. The tech, I'm not going to benefit. I don't care about it, frankly. It's not my interest, but my client has an interest, and many people do. And I understand why, they think they're going to get rich or live, lives of, traveling to Mars and building subdivisions there, or going into black, I don't know what people think they're going to get out of this, but for me, I see, again, the technology, the defense, I get it, but you're messing with the foundations of our civil society when when our government, or when the executive and the legislative branch aren't communicating, and we're deceiving ourselves internally over this. It's just you're destroying the thing we're fighting for.
But idiots. We're also going against something that Lou had discussed before, and about history and science and everything else, that we're dealing with an existing, if you want to call it, scientism that's out there, or historism, looking at this belief of it. It's almost like a religion to a degree. And if you bring out other stuff that challenges all what everyone's been saying for a long time, there's a lot of the people who believe in this stuff and back it, that makes it more difficult for this to get brought forward.
Yeah, and speaking of Lou, he's attending to a lot of things, been very busy, and but hopefully taking some relaxation this summer, as he can. But he's an example of another person who, he's been, quite frankly, the target of a lot of these articles, at least implicitly, or one of the targets. And it shows you how, they always say you take fire when you're over the site, over the target. But he's been taking fire for a long time. And, I just say again I've known Lou for a bit over a year. He's always been, I have tremendous respect for him. He's a good human being, and, he wants disclosure, but he believes in his oaths and security oaths. And so he'll live that way. But, people have unfairly maligned him repeatedly, and continue to do so, because frankly, and they find heroes in people who are both strategically as well as tactically. I'm not saying they're not saying the right thing. They're not saying the truth, but they're doing things in a way which I think is not so great. So they made heroes out of the wrong people, and that's the truth. And Lou is a hero. Maybe not a perfect one, you know.
Everybody makes mistakes. We're human.
But right, I mean, but the mistakes are relatively minor.
Yeah.
What you know, but anyway, so
have you ever heard of a doctor? Have you ever heard of a doctor that perfects medicine? No, they don't perfect medicine because they practice medicine.
Yeah, you know, and what's funny about the whole thing is ufology as a whole, rather than, you know, standing together, you know, it's just the typical story of human beings, right? People fight over influence or what they believe to be power or their own sense of self-purpose, and it's just very, you know. So to me, if we don't get disclosure because we've torn down our heroes, because we want to get excited by sort of the end of the story rather than the beginning, you know, establishing the initial chapters of the story, which, you know, start with the craft and then you go on down and you can get to the NHI and then eventually you can get to consciousness. Like there's a progression in how you tell a story. And, you know, frankly, what I've seen, you know, is that kind of the story has been guided in a way that leads to our discredit, despite the missteps of whoever it is who's orchestrated this stupidity, right? So I guess I fear, at least somewhat, that the story we're being distracted by is, you know, is not a good one. Even if it turns out to be ultimately true, you got to tell a story in order. And I think we're trying to tell different parts of the story and confusing the narrative. And ultimately, it would not surprise me, frankly, if the narrative being proposed by this cabal of, you know, limited intellects, I don't know what you want to call them, but it may prevail because it's easier for the American people to accept. You can understand that if they ignored the drones over New Jersey, what else will they, you know, they'll ignore anything.
Oh, we've had craft going over our nuclear power plants going back for decades, if not longer.
Right. But I mean, you know, and you know, yes, over like Palo Verde in Arizona, but those are recent. But again, people are allowing some sort of, well, maybe they were just conventional drones or we're not sure what they were. And, you know, it gets all very nebulous. And this is really in favor. This, again, you know, if you can make all of this sort of a giant stew of explanations, then you get it to be real confusing to where the average person kind of tunes out. You know, it's like, well, he said, she said. Well, who knows? But I love our government, love America. You know, I'm sure they'll figure it out. Meanwhile, I just want to grab some coffee. That's what's really going on. And then in ufology, what we do, we destroy the Lou Elizondos. We promote other people to be heroes who are tactically, and, you know, people knew. You wouldn't find them nearly as nice or as strategically sound as you would hope. And then you get people, you know, for example, like my client who inadvertently, you know, had Tim Phillips confirm for all of us a very significant fact that, you know, that he was a person who observed some miraculous stuff. And we need to start thinking about what do we do with all this? All right, what do we do with all this? Well, first of all, we demand respect and fair treatment for not only my client, a private citizen, an entrepreneur who just wants to help. Sure, take care of him. But also, what about all the whistleblowers out there who are part of the government, who have suffered enormous emotional and personal harm, you know, and just feeling deceived and with no outlet, feeling desperate. Many of them who have no other skill set, or they don't see how their skill set translates into other places. And, you know, you got to feel bad for people like that. You know, and not just the ones who are in the news, the ones who have stayed quiet all this time, who've gone to AARO, who've gone to other places. What are you doing for them? I just find this to be, look, I've never been a big UFO person. And like I said, I'm not that interested in the technology for me personally in terms of, you know, benefiting me. I don't make money at this as a lawyer. I am in it just for the civics of it. And to treat people this way and to do this is just unbelievable. It's just unbelievably stupid. But the United States manages to do this from time to time. We deceive ourselves. We lie to ourselves, and we don't even have accountability. I mean, you know, Look at weapons of mass destruction. Nobody really got held accountable for it. So maybe the UFO, the people who held all this stuff secret and told us it's all bullshit, maybe they, I think they should feel fairly confident that they'll get away with it. And then on us, what do? Tear each other down. It's insane. It's an insane. We deserve, frankly, the fate we get. So if we don't get disclosure, we deserve it. If we get disclosure, it's because we worked for it. That's really it.
Yeah, but if people like your client come public and reveal the truth of what they know to the American people, that would then make it impossible for the government to continue to lie about it once the truth is out there and it's known. That would be a step in the right direction. I also believe that the general public, one of the things that has been keeping them in the background, so to speak, about the drones, about UAP, about all of it, is that there hasn't been, so far to date, one actual shred of evidence that's indisputable. They haven't seen anything directly like that so far. And if somebody like your client, if your client brings it out and people can know exactly what it is that they're looking at and what the government has created, then they won't be able to lie about it anymore. It'll bring the truth forward.
I understand what you're saying. I frankly disagree with you, because I think that we have plenty of evidence. We already have, right? Like I've been saying this forever. We already have a we don't have necessarily a preponderance of the evidence, but we have a plausible reality here that there is, a probable cause, let's say, that there is something going on. And we have not managed to work together as a community. We tear each other down. So everybody has their favorite, right? Some people love Lou. Some people love Dave Grush. Some people love, others, in the past, whoever, right? Everybody has their fan favorite. Right. The way ufology treats its own community and itself, and then they get fascinated by the people who are really oftentimes, just in it for the clicks, and they get upset on X and all this stuff. Meanwhile, 98%, 99% of America, A, doesn't know what we're talking about even. B, even knowing what we're talking about, manages to fairly easily ignore it. And I know what you're saying. Well, I get it. You're saying, well, if your client brings out this truth, and maybe it'll lead in that direction. I don't know. But I first of all, that's a decision that he has to navigate with his own sense of things. Again, my clients are individual people, and I treat them like individuals. I'm not, again, unlike anybody else. I'm here for you. But if disclosure is your priority, then it is my priority. If it is not your first priority, then it's not my first priority either. Because as a lawyer, I am dedicated to the client, not to some abstract mission, right? So I am different than other people who are there to. I'm only here for you as an individual. I do hope it leads to disclosure. I hope that most of my clients do want to move in that direction. I certainly know Lou does. I believe that my client is very interested in helping the United States, and if that helps towards disclosure, great. But I disagree with this idea that there's going to be some phenomenal piece of evidence, a picture, a video, whatever, a piece of something, where everybody's going to go, yep, that's it. Now we know, right? That to me is very unlikely to ever happen. Rather, we have plenty of evidence. We have plenty of people who've testified and who've spoken, who would like to speak, right? And I think we have enough. We just need to compel our government and say to people like Senator Rounds and others, look, it's a nice story you're telling, but the reality is, that there is a very advanced drone program, which has some of the characteristics of the 5 or 6 observables, however you want to think about it. You've had it for a long time. Why are you not broadly disseminating at least the ontology of this to us so that we can begin to comprehend what this new world will mean? Why not? What's the danger? What's the risk? Tell us what the risk is. At least give us an assessment. But, who knows? In their minds, they're all the geniuses. And
hopefully if your client decides to come forward, we'll force their hand. They won't have a choice anymore. And hopefully when he does, you'll bring him on the show here with me and Thomas so we can go over this and hear from himself what he had to endure and deal with on dealing with AARO and the government and
I think
people like Tim Phillips.
I think he'll tell his story in the way that he chooses, but I can make no guarantees. And again, that's up to the individual to decide, because there are people who I've met who, certainly I would love them to say or do certain things or do things differently or whatever. But, my role is really as a counselor and an advocate, so I give you my perspective on various options. You make the choice which suits your personality and your goals and your interests. And then at that point, I advocate for those particular things. So, all I can say is that my client is for sure a patriot, for sure a person who means goodwill to all of us, would never threaten or try to extort anything of the sort from AARO or the U.S. government or anybody else. And just wants to help. And again, what happens if, he believes obviously this is American, but maybe for a period of time, it was curious as to maybe it wasn't. And so that would have been a tremendous threat to, if this isn't ours, then, boy, we have some real concerns. And so we have a lot to think about and a lot to do, but more will be coming out, I believe, in time. I don't know when. I will say that I think that Senator Gillibrand is one who should really pay attention to this. And of course, when I think there was some issue about her knowledge of the most recent appointment, I believe, of John Kalowski or whatever his name is. But this is her, she sponsored this. She was the co-sponsor, I believe, with Rubio of AARO. She's the one who got it funding in, I think, 2022, something like that. So
this is her baby.
Yep. Yeah. So when you have an organization which is treating, people of relatively goodwill who just, want to help, or at least find out what even if they're just the curious person who's like, look, I don't know what I saw, but I want to tell you about this. And what is this? And you say, look, it's American tech. Don't worry about it. But they're not even doing that. They're trying to hurt them. They're trying to hurt them. And they're going in public and making statements as these people are medically ill. This is akin to, Dave Grush. Again, the whole, these people are all medically ill. What an immoral, unethical framing for an American citizen who just wants to help. And God, what those other people, and some of whom I've spoken to, who've come before AARO and tried to tell their truth, the indignity of it, to do that to good public servants, you have lost your mind.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's a good thing that we have you representing your client that will come out and explain to the public some of what's going on so that they could be aware of these types of behavior coming from our own government that we fund, by the way.
Well,
so we're paying for this shit.
We're all gonna pay for it in one way or another. I pay in one way, we all pay in another way. We all pay in different ways, but I'd like to take some of the questions. I saw some people have their hand. I believe Andy and Ashes and some other people do. So I just want to get a couple of your, people's questions. And again, I may not be able to answer, but do the best I can.
Andy, go ahead.
Well, he's muted or he's up there. So.
Yeah, all right. Maybe he's in the library.
Maybe he fell. Yeah, it could be there or fall asleep. If not, Ashes, I think you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Ivan. I have a question because some of this seems to go over my head a little bit. And I understand that you want to protect your client. I completely get that, especially because you're a lawyer and that's what your job is to do. But if we, the public, don't know his name, and Tim Phillips and Mick West did not mention his name either, then, how are we supposed to connect the dots as an outsider? And why would it be important to bring the information up?
So your question is why his identity is one for, which he, at least at this moment, has not given me any direction to reveal. Certainly, Representative Burleson knows who he is. Senator Rounds know who he is. Tim Phillips and Sean Kirkpatrick know who he is, and others do too, whose names I won't say because different reasons, but others do. So, needless to say, he is known. Yeah, so they know him. But if he chooses to come forward, I again, these are questions that he has to navigate. I appreciate you saying that, how do we take the next step, or how do we find out more? Well, but for Tim Phillips' inadvertent disclosure of or confirmation of some things, we wouldn't have even probably had this opportunity, because they would have had plausible deniability. But now it's done. They know who he is. They know where he's been. He's kept all his receipts. So
do you think like maybe they're going to pull it out later to use against him? Is that the concern here, or?
Listen,
I think it would be illegal if they did that, wouldn't it, Ivan? They couldn't reveal his identity publicly. They would violate the law by doing that. He testified under whistleblower protections. Go ahead, Ashley.
I meant if his client comes out, not before his client comes out, but is the reason for speaking about this publicly the concern that later on, when your client does come out, they will use this information against him to try to use defamatory language and, tear his reputation apart, essentially.
I don't know if they, I don't know it's like I said, always go into the person's brain. What was Tim Phillips saying? He was asked a question that was not quite on topic. It was, how was your experience with the UAP task force? And, he could have given any answer he wanted, but clearly the issue of my particular client was one that bothered him. And I think it bothered him, again, out of all the things that could have bothered him, it bothered him probably because Representative Burleson chose to speak about it indirectly, of course, incorrectly calling him a contractor. He's not presently a government contractor, and wasn't in the past, to my knowledge. But yeah, I mean,
because I wouldn't know who your client is. You understand, like, how that's a little confusing?
Oh, I get it. I mean, I get it, and if he had said his name, Tim Phillips would have other problems, but he's managed to keep it, discreet. So, and thus not defaming him necessarily, because nobody knows who he is. But it is you could understand that there is a person, unless, Tim Phillips is insane, that there is a person that he's saying was medically unsound and threatened the United States government. And that is my client. My client is here to say, that this is not the case. It's false. And more to the point, you wonder, well, why are they doing this? I don't know. That's the curiosity of it all. They would have been far better off not mentioning him at all, but they fell into it. So I don't know what to make. As far as his name and learning more about him, look, if he decides to...
I'm not necessarily like asking for his name. I'm just
I'm not giving it.
Right. But I'm just asking how we would know that he's your client unless it was brought up that he is your client.
How do we know that he's actually my client? Well,
yeah, because we would have to know some more background information, right? Because at this point, to me, and I might just be insane myself because I'm a little bit tired here, but how do I know he's not talking about, some dude named Fred that lives in Milwaukee, for instance?
So that he's, well, I mean, I guess, if you want to believe, or if they make the assertion, I was talking about another guy, not Ivan's client. We never even heard of Ivan's client. Yeah. Well, problem is that he has all the receipts that show the communications between him, SSCI, and AARO. So, I mean, then he's another person with a very similar story to who no, I mean, look, he's my client. I mean, to the extent that I can't reveal his identity. If there's another person who has a very similar story, then
just like a journalist a lot of times does not reveal their sources. So it's kind of, but you're in a more legal situation than a journalist is. So it makes sense, Ivan.
Yeah, well, I mean, bottom line is like, sure, I don't know what they'll come up with. Tim Phillips could say, you know what, I was thinking of somebody totally else, or I had hit my head before I started talking on that podcast, and I was just making stuff up, or actually the technology he showed wasn't that cool, but I still had a great time at Area 51. Like who the fuck knows what they're going to say? I don't care. Listen, the problem is that the ufology people, and not USers, but just in general, they're always looking for just look at the simplest explanation, right? Occam's razor or whatever. The simplest explanation is this. We have a program and have had it apparently for a long time. I don't know exactly how long. That has some incredible technology. Where did that technology come from? Well, seems like it came from someplace else because we don't know much. We can't do that so far as we know. And that's really what it comes down to. Now, whether there's NHI and all this other stuff, I mean, those are consciousness and, I don't know. But we don't need to get into all the, I'm sure Tim and Sean Kirkpatrick and perhaps Senator Pounds, they'll figure out some explanation.
So I guess the big question is, what is the main point that you want the audience to walk away with?
I think the main point is a couple of them. One is that to get a better sense of why AARO is the leadership of AARO, that there is a plan that, frankly, I think unfortunately, I think the SSCI, I think SSCI, I'm not sure as a whole, but I would say at least in part, there are people who seemingly know much more than they're letting on. And while they may be nominally portrayed or portray themselves as disclosure advocates, I think what there really is happening is they're shifting disclosure into the distant future in order for some reason to preserve some maybe asymmetrical technological advantage we presently have or to develop one. And I think that, so we're being misled in my opinion. Now, my client, his intent is to clear his name up, get a retraction stated that he is a patriotic American, that he is not medically unfit, and that he was approaching AARO in good faith. And they need to make that statement and make that apology and make it publicly so that his own reputation is not sullied.
See, that's that kind of confusing part to me, though, because if we don't have his name, how is he supposed to clear his name if it's all?
Yeah, I get it, but I think that he is also seeking to, and this is again an inference. I'm not going to say that this is his entirety of his goals. He has his own plans, but I would say that he wants also to again re-engage and to discuss how he can still assist, or if he can assist with this program. It must be, let's call it, so that he can help to at least explain some of the vulnerabilities in the system. So he's very concrete. He's not here necessarily for disclosure. Doesn't mean he's against it. He's just very narrow in his intent. But he is also concerned, and to some extent why he came public is also because he's concerned that maybe Tim Phillips was foreshadowing some sort of further attempts to discredit him or perhaps do worse. And so he's letting everybody know he's here to fight back if you bring this fight to him. There was no reason to have done so, that he wants to help America, and that's it. So this is a bit of letting them know.
Yeah, God, yeah.
That this is not going to go well if you have Tim Phillips and others continue to harm him for no reason whatsoever. Yeah. This shows you the malintent. They could have never brought his name up, and he probably would have continued to try to do what he was prosaically trying to do, which is to help, and been frustrated, but just moved on. But now he feels fear that maybe they'll make something up. Maybe they will come and try to take his knowledge under maybe the Invention Secrecy Act or some other act. Maybe they will do worse. He doesn't know. But to go with open arms and hope to help, and to be treated so poorly, you begin to get maybe a bit concerned that you're some kind of target. And the beginning of the target is a media campaign to slander him. And what comes next, I don't know. So this is his letting them know. He's not happy, and you need to make amends, and not do anything further, because he's not going to sit around for that.
There's no
That's
reason to
basically-
have it escalate unnecessarily. It's already gotten to a point that it should never have reached. And that's part of the reason that you're here to go ahead and discuss about this. While you can't bring everything forward, this guy feels rightfully threatened at this point, and I get it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at people who have no qualms with David Grush suing the sheriff's department somewhere on this intentional, release of his private information. Well, what comes next for my client? Do his medical files come out? What comes out? Does he get a letter, or what's going to happen next to him? So I think he's bringing his story forward right now, and again, I think he's open to re-engagement. But again, he wants to, he's not the first. He's not here to necessarily satisfy our desire for disclosure. He's here to help with telling the American government that maybe some of its tech isn't as super secret as they think it is, and or some of its capacities, and that he wants to help, and that even if they had just said, well, look, you have discovered stuff, but no thanks, we don't need your help, and but we recognize. I don't know what they were thinking, frankly, but again, sort of an unprompted stab at him, it's just very curious why you do that. And again, they seem to do that with people that they have a fixation on, a target on, and I think that's what's going on. So,
you're right. That's exactly how they operate. We are all publicly familiar with how they treated David Grush, Lou Elizondo. The list goes on. So if your client is on that list, and I too believe he is, then the only steps that he can take to protect himself and his family is to come forward, because number one, they're not going to publicly admit the government as far as what they're doing or that they're targeting him. And number two, they're not going to publicly apologize for their actions. That's something that has never occurred in history, and they're not going to change that now. So your client needs to be proactive at this point and do everything he can to cover his ass. Because that.
I appreciate it. I think he's well positioned. I think he's made his point, at least up to this point, known. And I have a feeling that hopefully, Tim Phillips and Sean Kirkpatrick and others recognize that there was no need for this, and that they need to make some kind of amends, and public or not, I suppose I would prefer it be public, but that's just me naturally, because but it wouldn't make sense perhaps in the context of his present anonymity. But the point is that he has to at least account for the fact that he needs to look to the future, and if this is the start of something against him, then they've come to the wrong person. They shouldn't have done this. So again, Patriot wants to help. Didn't need to have this terrible experience with AARO and be mistreated in his mind. Again, I only know so much, so I can't present much more than what I know, and I have to respect my client's wishes at the entirely. So. But I'll tell you,
I agree with your client. He's right. They never should have attacked him and gone after him in the way they did.
I will say, pay more attention. The interview with Ross Coulthart and Senator Rounds. I mean, you read into that. Why does he say what he says? Not just what does he say, right? And some of the contradictions, I think you noted. Oh, why do we need to talk about NHI if there's nothing but prosaic technology at work? Why do you do that? Well, the answer is because probably he wants to remain, in that, like most politicians, is like event, they probably know there's NHI. And so this allows them the plausible deniability of saying, look, I was open to it at the time. I'm still open to it today. Turns out there's some NHI. See, I'm here for you. And I've always been here for you. As opposed to, but right now I don't know anything about NHI. But if I learn more, or if it's confirmed, it's a very nice way of setting themselves up for the future when that is, when they are not looked back as being, roadblocking whatever that reality is about NHI, right? But in fact, that's exactly what they're doing. And it's not, I don't think it's right.
No, it isn't right. You're absolutely correct about that, which is why this has been going on for as long as it has. Go ahead, Ivy.
Yeah, it's interesting times. Look, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and share a little bit. I think that we'll see how things develop, and we'll be here. But needless to say, we know that Tim Phillips and Mick West, we see the pattern, we see all the articles, we see the various attempts to confuse the broader public with, small circle of storytellers, circular storytelling, to a larger internal self-deceit campaign, to it's all just birds, or now it's all just advanced American tech. I mean, these are just silly. Let's just get to it.
It's like Blue Book 2.0, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess, but American people are buying it up, and we in ufology do no favors when we follow, when we head in the direction of hybrids and not even looking over what's over our head. And again, I'm not saying that there might not be hybrids, or those spheres may not be part of some, defense network or whatever. I don't know. What I do know is I think that strategically, if in ufology we don't get to the bottom of what's in our skies, what are these drones, which is the clearest thing that we've all, had in front of us, then we don't, I believe we're not going to make a lot of forward progress. And it's pretty easy to lose the thread, the narrative. I mean, the American people are pretty distracted. They don't, until we, sadly enough, until we probably have a 9/11 event involving drones, we won't pay as much attention. And the problem is that it may not even be one just of, may not be a limited one. What happens if it involves this very, very high-tech, advanced tech stuff? I mean, it may not be possible to recover from such a surprise, let's say, attack by this advanced drone stuff. I mean, maybe that'll be it. You don't get to fight back, right? So, there have been a lot of speculation. I don't know what to make of it all, other than we have very confusing time ahead of us, and we need to get there.
I agree. And it sounds to me like your client potentially could be one of the steps forward.
I think there's also other people that I know who have interesting stories to tell, and eventually we'll get to them. But but one step at a time. Like I said, I'm a lawyer to my clients first, and then somewhere beneath that, I'm a disclosure advocate. Doesn't mean I don't like disclosure, but I have to respect my clients' wishes. So I appreciate what everybody suggests, and I appreciate your input on that. But everybody has their own path, and it would be wrong for me to impose my path, or what the path of what I just the disclosure path. Come open. Just tell it all, risk it all. That's not the way I navigate things for individuals. I got to look at them as a whole person and what's in their personal best interest. So that's what
obviously. I agree. But we're presenting an opportunity to consider moving forward. That's all.
I appreciate your public good, argument, and I'll keep it in mind. And I'm certain that my client and others are aware of these arguments. And there's always a balancing between the public good and what. The problem is that we haven't been presented with what the counter to this public good argument is. What is it that precludes you from giving at least the ontological knowledge? What is it that precludes you from revealing some part of this science? It's strange. It's like they're so concerned about America, and it's like, well, then you think of America as a very fragile thing that can't handle the truth. I mean, it's crazy, right? Like Lou Elizondo says, America can handle the truth, right? So why not tell people the truth? I don't understand it, but there's a lot of smart people who love to talk about, kind of like to think that they're so smart that they get to deceive everybody else in their best interests, and that's why do you, that's just ridiculous. So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you for the time here, guys.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, Ivan. It was a pleasure. And as always, one hell of a conversation, my friend. You have a lot of information, and you're very well spoken, and we appreciate your time.
I just try to keep it real with everybody. Not everybody likes me because I just say what I think. But, at the end of the day, I'm there for all my clients, and helping them achieve their optimal outcome. But I do hope that we eventually run into disclosure, whatever that means. I have no idea what it means. I'm probably the least benefited from it, because not only of age, but just because I'm happy in life now, and I don't, if there's mantids, fine. If there's tech which goes to Mars in a second, fine. I don't find that fascinating, but I know a lot of people do. So anyway, listen, thanks so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your 4th of July weekend. Honestly, I know this is an international audience, but God bless America. I'm glad we're still a great country, and we just got to live up to our promise. It's always a battle for every generation. So thank you.
It is, and we're ending the show out now, so just stay for a few minutes, and we'll close everything out.
Okay, I'll stay there.
Thank you, Ivan.
Thanks, sure. No worries.
All right, Mike, thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for coming out tonight, Ivan. Appreciate you being here, my friend.
You're muted, Ivan.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Thomas. I appreciate it. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks,
absolutely. And Mike, getting back into the studio itself. Great opportunity to hang out with Ivan. Thank you for being here, my friend, setting this up.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I think it was something that we really needed to cover for the public.
Oh, yeah.
And bring more attention to what's really going on behind the scenes with things like this.
Absolutely. I want to go ahead and thank Mike, all the people who gave us some super chats tonight, starting off with Mr. Catfish 2100, Anonymous Rex, and then William Underwood. Thank you, sir. Faze Will, appreciate the birthday wishes from you and many. Melora, thank you very much. And Mr. Catfish 2100 again. The Grays, Depends. We also have Laura Greeno. Thank you very much for that wonderful super chat. And Laura Campbell for winding it up, for thanks about Ivan and everything. Mike, I appreciate everyone coming out for this tonight's episode of Disclosure Tonight. And as we usually say at the end of every episode, eyes open, no fear, be safe, everybody. But
go back to Party City where you belong.
Absolutely. We'll catch you on the flip side. Good night, everybody. I'll come back now. Here, have a good one. Bye-bye.